So which of these two new speed boots should you buy? The F50 Elite or the Ultra Carbon? Well, in today's video, I'm gonna give you my personal experiences and preferences as I compare the two boots to hopefully ultimately help you decide which of these two, or any other speed boot out there, you should buy from Unisport in the link right up there or in the description. Let's go. But as always, we can start out by looking at the two uppers that are kind of similar, you could say, in the sense that they're both variations of textile mesh uppers. But then again, they're also kind of different because the F50 Elite's Fiber Touch upper here feels a bit thinner and also slightly more malleable, both in hand and on feet, compared to the Ultra, which is definitely also thin and definitely also soft, but it feels ever so slightly thicker and a bit more structured, and I would also say a bit more rich in the mesh pattern. And that also means that on feet, the F50 Elite feels a bit more second skin-like and has a very, free level of softness to it where you can really wiggle your toes. Whereas the Ultra, again, it's really soft, it's really thin, but it just gives me a fraction more thickness and, padding to the upper compared to the F50. So I would definitely say that both are really comfortable in the sense that there's nothing unpleasant going on my feet. They're just comfortable in slightly different ways. But they are thin, they are speed boots, so again, similar, but then again, not all that similar, if you get what I mean. And then when we look at the fit itself in the two boots, it is relatively snug and rather sculpted, I would say. It is speed boot-like, as you would expect. But I will also say that the fit, for me, for my foot, and that's important, the F50 Elite it feels a little bit tighter in the midfoot and also gives me a slightly closer sensation in the forefoot compared to the Ultra, where again, this is my experience, there is just a little bit more space and width, especially on the bottom part of the medial side here in the midfoot, but also in the forefoot. Now, obviously, it's also important to note that this is the unisex version. So if you want that slightly more narrow and sculpted sensation, there's also the women's fit. Anyways, I also need to mention the toe box, where I do get the sensation that there's a bit more volume and height in the toe box on the Ultra, and that sounds as if it might be a bad thing for the F50. This low, pointy toe box, might that be unpleasant for some people out there? And sure, there's potential for that, but I don't think it's gonna be that big of a problem because the upper is so soft and so pliable that I think it's just gonna really mold to and follow the shape of your toes very, very easily. So I haven't had any issues, but if you like your wiggle room, space and volume for your toes, it's just a bit more in the Ultra. But we should also real quick talk about the tongues here, where on the Ultra Carbon you get this one-piece knitted construction, whereas on the F50 you get the classic U-throw construction with the compression fit inside that is not your standard tongue, but it has these almost wings that it actually wraps the side of your foot. And it's really hard for me to say what's better here because it very much depends on personal preference. So I can't tell you whether the F50 or the Ultra is better for you. Now, I really like that very smooth, seamless transition with the knit tongue from boot to ankle. It's very free and it feels as if the boot and the ankle just kind of melts together, as stupid as it sounds. But I will also be honest and say that I probably personally prefer the U-throat and the compression fit tongue because it allows you to adjust the laces a little bit better. You can open it up, you can loosen it, you can tighten it in depending on your foot shape and what you need. So I feel that you can get a slightly more personal and custom fit with the U-throat in the F50s. But again, personal preference, you should totally decide, and I don't want to hate on this. I just happen to like this more. It's solid, and I've enjoyed a lot of boots with the knit tongues. Anyways, we should also talk about the sizing in the two boots here. Now, I have gone through the size in both the F50 UK 6.5 that I always use and UK 6 that I always use for PUMA. Both are Japanese 25 centimeters, 250 millimeters. Cool. Now, the F50 here they run like a fraction long, but I would say that they're very close to being the perfect fit for me width and lengthwise. The Ultra Carbon, widthwise, very, very good. Almost perfect. Women's fit, spot on. Lengthwise, it feels as if they run at least half a size long. Keep in mind, this is a 25 centimeter boot. It says 25 on the label. I took out the insole, measured it, it's 26 centimeters. which makes it a little bit problematic to get the right size. I mean, I could go down half a size and would it be okay? Maybe, because the upper is really soft and pliable when broken in especially. But do I want to do that? Go after that? It's a bit tricky to get the right size in this. And it is just, looking at it, it is just longer than the F50. Right, we should also talk about lockdown real quick, where both boots I would say are okay, they're pretty decent without being that impressive. Unless you use the runner's loop, which it makes a big difference. So you use the runner's loop. Now, I will say that in terms of actual lockdown, it feels as if the Ultra Carbon the material has a bit more structural integrity. It just feels a bit more stable with the material itself. I would say that the heel in the F50 feels a bit stronger. Solid in both, but just a bit stronger in the F50. And in the midfoot, I haven't noticed that big of a difference, but I would go grip socks and runner's loop and you should be pretty solid. Now, in terms of weight, which is also important to a lot of people, the Ultra Carbon is 209 grams in the size 42, whereas the F50 is 183 grams. And obviously a lot of you will be sat out there thinking,
how can you even compare the two?
Now, obviously, 209 grams is not light by any means, but is not that heavy either. And while yes, you do feel a difference on foot, there is that slightly more, it just feels, well, lighter, obviously, a bit more free, and it has that, wow, feeling. I'm not really wearing anything when you put them on. But I will say that, the difference isn't as big on the pitch in the heat of the moment as it sounds. Although, I mean, I could have done with the Ultra being, let's say, 10, 15 grams lighter. I don't think it should be a deal breaker, but there is a difference. Now you know. But speaking of differences, when we take a look at the two outsoles here, there is a gigantic difference. And I could talk for like 20 minutes straight about the two outsoles, but in short, on the Ultra Carbon, you get the carbon fiber speed system here, whereas on the F50, you get the Sprint Frame 360. Now, the Ultra here is one of the most extreme outsoles I think I've ever tried in my life. It really has that wow factor to it, where I'm just like, what did I just experience? Whereas the F50, it just feels a little bit more balanced and I would say mellow. And maybe you'll get what I mean in a second. Because the Ultra here, feels as if it has a much stiffer plate, where the snapback is it just feels a lot more aggressive and wild. You can almost hear it compared to the F50. And also these T-shaped SpeedTrack studs that are pretty long, but they also really dig in, and they have a very aggressive bite in the ground that basically mean that no matter which direction you push off in, it's just gonna be very, very responsive. Some people would also call it polarizing, and that's fair because it is on the extreme of the spectrum, and that's just what PUMA are going for. Very, very dedicated to that hardcore response and acceleration in the ground. Whereas again, the F50, it just feels as if they're appealing to a slightly wider audience. It's also not difficult to be trending more towards the middle than the Ultra, but you just get a bit more of everything here. A little bit of focus on linear aggressiveness in the forefoot, rotational maneuverability and changing direction on the midfoot, and the sole plate in general is just a lot softer. So appealing slightly more to the wider masses, I would say. Again, it's a matter of what you want, and I think this is just about enough for speed boot, whereas this is really, really aggressive. So it depends on what you want. Right, let's also touch on the shape of the outsole in the forefoot, where you do get that raised toe in the Ultra Carbon. That's actually been an Adidas thing with the X boots lately. But now it's on the Ultra Carbon here, where you really get that, you're almost being rolled onto your forefoot into that ready position, which is super nice. But then again, the trade-off is that when you're just standing on your flat foot, you shouldn't do that as a footballer, but sometimes you do, your toes are just raised a little bit unnaturally off the ground. Whereas with the F50, you get that classic flat outsole, which means that you just feel closer to the ground. It feels a little bit more nimble, especially with that low pointy toe box. And again, it's up to you what you like. I kinda enjoy both, to be honest, but would probably be trending slightly more towards the F50 because I like really that tiptoey, nimble sensation, as good as the raised toe is. But it's up to you. And finally, there is the touch on the ball, where obviously, as you would expect, both boots are relatively close and one-to-one feeling on the ball, because they are both thin uppers. But still, again, there is a little bit of a difference. Let me explain. So the F50 here, again, given the fact that it has a slightly thinner upper, it also does feel closer to the ball, a little bit more barefoot, and I would say very, very crisp. For good and bad. Some people will like that very sharp connection. Some people will think it's simply too close, too barefoot-like. Now on the Ultra Carbon, it's a little, there's just a bit more material between your foot and the ball. There's just a little bit, I wouldn't call it padding, but it just takes away the worst thing when you touch and strike the ball. In terms of grip, the Ultra Carbon here has this slightly, sticky, tacky coating, giving you a good amount of grip on the ball, especially in dry conditions. A little bit sticky, I would say. Whereas the F50 has this matte, almost gritty micro texturing on the forefoot that does help you in terms of getting that connection, especially when you dribble and that initial first touch on the ball, but is not overly grippy either. And we also need to mention that shape of the toe, where on the F50, it's a low pointy toe box, flat tooling. You just feel very nimble, very ballet dancer-like in these on the ball. Super, super sharp. Whereas in the Ultra, my brain, personally at least, just needed to compute with the fact that your toes are a little bit higher. There's a bit more volume in the toe box, and also there's this pretty stiff toe bumper to bond the upper and the tooling together for durability that I just had to get used to being there. It wasn't a problem long term, but I just had to get used to the fact that all of a sudden there was boot and foot where there normally isn't when I touch the ball. So keep it in mind. Right, so that's a lot of talking about two new speed boots that move in kind of different directions, you could say. They're both speedy, they're both fast, they're both lovely, but I would put it this way, that the F50 Elite here kind of takes the blueprint, the prototype DNA of the old F50s and then mixes it with the modern technology from the X line to give you this very sleek and sculpted and super minimal speed boot that almost like disappears on your foot in the best possible way. Whereas the PUMA Carbon, just Ultra Carbon as it's called here, just gives you this holy shit kind of experience where it's just so extreme, but also so much fun. I don't think any other boot has given me the same wow smile as this put on my face when I first tried it. So it really depends on what you want. I don't think the 260 versus 280 euro price should really determine it, but more look at what are you looking for in a speed boot. Now, personally, I love the dedication in the Ultra Carbon, but I think that given the sizing and the fact that the upper is ever so slightly softer and I think just fits me ever so slightly better, I will be trending towards the F50, but absolutely no hate and actually a lot of respect to the Ultra Carbon for just doing its thing so dedicatedly. Dedicatedly? Is that what? You know what I mean. But guys and girls, which of the two boots do you prefer? Let me know in the comment section right down below. Remember that if you want to buy either of them, the link to Unisport is right over there. And you can, of course, also check out my individual reviews of the boots on the screen right now. Don't forget to subscribe with the notifications on. And with that, I'll signing off. I can't talk anymore. You know what I mean. See you later, guys. Cheerio.